Ladies and gentlemen, can I ask you to please take your seats? Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for attending this important event on accelerating investment through innovative finance for agri-food system transformation. My name is Lauren Phillips. I'm the Deputy Director of the Rural Transformation and Gender Equality Division at the FAO. We have an excellent and distinguished panel of high-level speakers today representing UN agencies, governments, multilateral development banks, and development finance institutions, as well as civil society and the private sector. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing all of your perspectives on how we can innovate for financing agri-food systems, but also how we can scale up financing that is much needed in low and middle income countries. Before I invite Her Excellency Amina Mohammed, Deputy Secretary General, for her opening remarks, let me just frame the debate by making 3 quick points. The first is that the crisis of food insecurity is often a crisis of financing. Despite the growing needs of the most vulnerable to food insecurity and nutrition, the amount of financing available for agri-food systems transformation has barely increased since 2015. And additionally, the agri-food system has not benefited from the same level of financial innovation as other sectors over these past years, and is in fact weakly integrated with other sources of financing like climate financing, despite the central role that agri-food system plays in climate, environment, and biodiversity. However, there is an increasing acknowledgement that we need more financing channeled to transform agri-food systems. And that is partially why the Compromiso de Sevilla, which was signed at the end of June, mentions the need to increase financing for agri-food systems transformation, and also points out the importance of ensuring that that financing reaches the poorest people in the poorest countries, who are often the most food insecure. With that, it's my pleasure to invite Her Excellency Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed up to the podium, and also Maximo Torero, Chief Economist from FAO. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates. Can you hear me? Okay. Do you want to? Yeah, okay, very great. I'd like to begin by thanking the government and the people of Ethiopia for hosting us here in Addis Ababa. We started our action day yesterday, but in particular to FAO for organizing this critical dialogue. Let me begin by stating the not so obvious fact. Food systems are more than just food. They're about health, nutrition, climate, decent work, justice and dignity, and the right to a better future. And we heard that from our leaders this morning. Last year's Pact for the Future reaffirmed our shared commitment to food systems that are inclusive, sustainable, equitable, resilient and grounded in human rights. Yet armed with this knowledge, progress is still nowhere near where it should be. As we launch the 2025 State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World report today, the irony is made abundantly clear. What the data reveals is a crisis of priority, not just resources. We've perfected the financing of human wants while we are failing to fund the most of our human needs. Global hunger and malnutrition is rising, trade shocks are pushing food prices out of reach, and climate change is disrupting harvests and supply chains. Conflicts continue to drive hunger from Gaza to Sudan and beyond. 1/3 of our world's people cannot afford a healthy diet. Another third of the world's food is lost or wasted. Finance, the engine of progress, and the key to turning this situation around is also shamefully absent. The investment gap for food systems transformation stands at a staggering $680 billion annually. And so the result is a food crisis, but also a crisis of justice for the 735 million people globally who are suffering. Today, 3 out of our 4 agricultural SMEs in sub-Saharan Africa cannot access adequate finance. Farmers in the global south pay far more for capital than their counterparts in developed nations. Meanwhile, women farmers face even steeper barriers despite producing the majority of the continent's food. Behind these statistics are real people facing impossible choices. Picture a farmer facing drought. It destroys her crop, but she has no insurance, no savings, no safety net. She plants again with borrowed seeds, carrying debt that grows heavier with each failed harvest. She cannot access credit. She's locked out of financial markets. Ultimately, she and her family are forced to choose between starving or abandoning their land. This is a startling story of struggle, yet one that millions face every day. This crisis demands more than sympathy. It demands a systemic change. It's time for a fundamental shift in what we finance, how we finance it, and who controls access to those resources. And it can take many forms: blended finance structures that mobilize private capital for public good, green bonds that channel investment towards climate-smart agriculture, debt for nature swaps that free resources for conservation and food security, insurance schemes that protect farmers from shocks that destroy their livelihoods overnight. But let us be clear, the Global South is not waiting to be rescued. It is leading solutions, and our role is to ensure that those solutions have the investment that they need to scale. Look at Rwanda, where digital platforms connect smallholder farmers directly to market and fair prices. Or Morocco, where water-smart agriculture helps communities survive intensifying droughts. These innovations work, but they do need the capital to scale up. And that means designing financial instruments that serve smallholder farmers alongside larger enterprises. It also means ensuring women and youth have central roles as agents of change in our development strategies. And that also means every dollar invested in food systems is rooted in human rights. The Kampala Declaration, Africa's renewed commitment to agricultural transformation, charts this path forward, and it builds on the Malabo commitments. To succeed, we need coordinated action across 4 critical areas. First, governments must lead transformation by aligning policies, budgets, and institutions around food security. Second, development finance institutions must de-risk private investment through guarantees, concessional loans, and first loss capital. Third, private sector partners must commit to inclusive business models that create value for farmers, not just the shareholders. Fourth, we must strengthen South-South and triangular partnerships that share knowledge, technology, and resources across the Global South. Friends, ladies and gentlemen, the saying "we reap what we sow" could not be more accurate when it comes to our food systems. It's time to choose innovative investments over the inertia that we see, or perhaps in many cases the indifference. Let us be the generation that chooses to nourish humanity and our planet, not just our pockets. Let's invest in food systems that catalyze health, prosperity, and a life of dignity for everyone, everywhere. I very much look forward to the discussions and the outcomes of this dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deputy Secretary General, for the story that you told and for reminding us all that stories like that are far too common given the large financing gap that agri-food systems face, and we appreciate your thoughts. I know that you have another commitment, so let us thank the Deputy Secretary General again for her words. Thank you so much. It is now my pleasure to pass the floor to Mr. Maximo Terrero Cullen, FAO's Chief Economist, for a presentation on financing for agri-food systems. Maximo, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for being here with us today. So what I will be doing is a small presentation about acceleration of investments through innovative finance. So let me start first with why is this so important. As all of you know, hunger has increased substantially since the third Financing for Development Conference to 733 million people in hunger in 2023. A few hours from now, we will be launching the SOFI at 6:30, and we will have the new numbers for 2024. So I won't tell you if they are going up or down, but the number is already too high. Now, to address the overlapping crises, it's crucial to leverage the role of financing for development to transform the agri-food systems, which can in turn reduce hunger, increase resilience, which will be central given the shocks that we will be facing, enable economic growth, promote sustainability and inclusivity, and prevent and mitigate the food crisis. Financing agri-food systems is insufficient and has not increased substantially over the past years. And there is a cost of inaction, and we have been working together with Joachim von Braun and David Laborde on these topics, and we need to be very careful on assessing this gap and trying to find innovative ways to close this gap. It is critically for us to prioritize increased investments in the transformation of the agri-food systems, and that's where financing innovation and ways to improve the way we access to finance. So it's not only at the country level access, but it's also to reduce inequalities by giving access to smallholder farmers will be essential. A more efficient, equitable, and innovative financing landscape for agri-food system transformation needs to happen, and we need to accelerate that process. That's why we call this meeting Acceleration of Financing. Now, as you can see here, the findings are the policies and interventions to get on track on SDG targets 2.1 and 2.2 will require additional resources from now until 2030, ranging from 176 billion to 3,975 billion to eradicate undernourishment, plus an additional 90 billion to meet select global undernourishment indicators. Estimates jump sharply to 15.4 trillion if the type of transformational policies that will have to be financed to increase affordability of healthy diets for millions while still reducing undernourishment are added. Even more, if we look at sustainability, our motto, which is good food for all, for today and tomorrow, if we look at it tomorrow, this cost will even be higher. So the challenge is enormous, and we need to work on trying to reduce that challenge. Now, this graph tries to show the critical steps to enhance the role of financing for development to promote the agri-food systems. So, of course, the first is to increase financing to agri-food systems and food security and nutrition, especially in low-income countries and low-middle-income countries. But the important thing also is that we ensure that the financing reaches small-scale food producers, rural communities, women, and youth. And that's extremely challenging. We have today tools to understand how we can help certain types of countries, depending on the level of income and depending on how debt stressed they are, what type of innovations or what type of financing tools could be there to help them. But then to go to what we call the last mile, to be able to reach to these smallholders, is a very complex issue. Because SMEs and smallholders, normally they don't have assets to give us guarantees. Normally the scale of production is very small, so you cannot give that as guarantee. Normally they are not linked to the financial systems. And normally if they are linked, the interest rates they will get are outrageous. It's very strange, but even I was a few weeks ago in my home country, in Peru, and Peru, as you know, is a great agro-exporter, is the top exporter of several products in the world high-value commodities. And what I was shocked is that even in the very advanced agro-industry in the coast of Peru, which is exporting to the US, to China, to Japan, to Europe, there is still not a good financing system for farming, meaning the financial sector, the formal financial sector for big companies of 10,000 hectares, is not prepared for a seasonal type of mechanism. And their scoring systems are not ready for that. And there are people lending money because of the velocity that we need the resources in agriculture to get returns which are enormous. Interest rates that are unbelievable to be happening in the formal agricultural system. Now imagine what it is that in the smallholder world. Or they don't have absolute access, and if they have access, it's extremely expensive because they are also informal. So the architecture of the financial institutions and organizations need to really adjust to the reality of the agri-food system, which is a sector which is seasonal by definition, is a sector which is vulnerable to climate. And that's where the insurance systems will play a role. But if we want to go to the last mile to smallholders, there is a lot more to do. Improving the scoring systems that they can adapt to that type of producers, also finding ways to create the scale between them so that we can make them inclusive. That will require also to use more efficiently the resources of governments, and that's the reorientation of agricultural expenditures and support to agriculture. And that's what we call the repurposing of agricultural support, which the World Bank, us, and many others are working together to try to find solutions to make the use of the resources more efficient, because public resources should be catalytic. That's where we need to bring international financial organizations, where we need to bring private sector, but public resources should be catalytic and very efficiently in the way they are. And of course, we need to ensure financing is systematic, localized, and right-based, especially if we want to link with the smaller producers. Now, at the country level, the choice of the specific instrument to promote agri-food system transformation is tied to a country capacity to access financing from capital markets. In these three boxes, which are with different colors, we try to bring the three different types of countries, and this was produced in the SOFI 2024. So we have countries with very limited ability to access financing, we have countries with moderate ability to access financing, and we have countries with high ability to access financing. Innovative financial instruments can be leveraged to mobilize capital and increase investments aimed at rural, financially underserved populations. These instruments can enable more ambitious, complex, and long-term interventions, which hold greater transformative potential for agri-food systems. This can include, among others, blended finance, transactions, green bonds, partial guarantees, and debt swap agreements. The choice of the specific instruments which we list within each of the boxes to be employed will be limited by a country capacity to access financing at commercial and sub-commercial terms, with more instruments being unlocked as the country improves its internal risk environment and its capacity to attract external investors. Low and middle-income countries that register the highest rates of food insecurity and malnutrition are all those that face the greatest structural constraints to access financing that could be channeled into addressing these issues. Low and middle-income countries with a limited ability to access financing tend to rely mainly on grants and concessional loans provided by bilateral and multilateral donors, which represent basic but essential sources of finance channeled towards developing their agri-food systems. Debt swaps are also important tools for these countries to gain much-needed fiscal space and liberate resources that can be channeled into the agri-food system projects. As these countries' risk environment improves, a wider range of financial instruments become more affordable and better available, such as equity and debt investments at rates increasingly closer to commercial, blended finance arrangements, and here when we refer to blended finance, there are two types of blending. One is financial, of course, but also information, which will be reducing the risk of companies. Sustainable bonds. These instruments tend to follow a strategic approach by which public concessional finance is leveraged to incentivize the flow of private capital towards agri-food systems by de-risking and enhancing investments that hold the greatest transformation potential for such systems and that will not be considered by commercial investors in the absence of public support. So clearly, innovative finance is likely to play a significant role only in countries with higher levels of macroeconomic stability. That's why, moving together, we cannot look at the agri-food system outside of the macroeconomic stability of a country. In Ethiopia, we see that change. There is not only a transformation of the agri-food system, but also a macroeconomic stability, which they are trying to foresee with the reforms that they did in monetary policy and macroeconomic policies. And many countries have to do that in parallel. It happened in many Latin American countries because that's the only way we will access to financial markets. But clearly, this type of taxonomy tells us that we need to differentiate the products that we have depending on the level of risk and the level of access that you have today. And that's really important. But again, we are not there even touching yet the last mile. We're just touching the access to finance to countries. The next step is to look at the last mile on how we can connect this financing, if it comes to the countries, to smallholders. Now, one issue that is also extremely important and which I think brings the continuity of what we do here to what will happen in COP30 is how we attract more climate financing to the agri-food system, which today is extremely restricted, 4%. And even if we look at the smallholders, it's even smaller. That needs to change. And the problem is that we don't understand yet, apparently, that there is a link between the right to food in a sector that has to provide the right to food, which is the agri-food system, and the sustainability, the environment. It's a sector that also emits 30% of emissions. It's a sector that uses the land, the water, and the biodiversity. So if we are going to achieve the commitments that we have and not reach the 1.5 degrees, we need to be sure that we do the necessary sustainable investments so that we can minimize those potential externalities. And that's where climate financing can play a crucial role, because it will help this sector to keep producing more, but more efficiently and sustainably. And that's for us producing more good food for all for today and tomorrow. And that's what will allow us to achieve the goal. It's both the energy sector and the agri-food systems the ones that have to create this change. But we need to work hard on this to be able to keep progressing in how we can achieve that. Now, some relevant instruments that can foster agri-food system financing are blending finance arrangements, debt swaps, as I mentioned before, the sustainability bonds, which is something that needs to evolve and needs to keep improving, so green, social sustainability, and sustainable links bonds, which are specific types of debt instruments that hold the potential to raise substantial amounts of capital directed at investments linked to a range of development goals, including the promotion of agri-food system transformation. Countries with a high capacity to access financing can leverage the earmarked capital mobilization by these bonds issuance to finance a wide range of interventions aimed to promoting agri-food system development. And then finally, insurance and partial credit guarantees, which again is starting to look at this last mile. The systems of accessing financing to smallholders that have worked are the ones that are also related to insurance. Because if you provide a loan linked to insurance at the same time, you protect the bank against the loss and therefore that they will be able to recover what they are lending. And you also protect the farmer. But there is a lot of work that still needs to be done to keep reducing the premiums from the insurance companies. Because for smallholders are not affordable. Even in developed countries, most of the insurance systems are fully subsidized. So we need to keep improving on data and provision of data to be able to minimize those problems and those what we call market failures of asymmetries of information that will help to be able to get those goals complied. Even one of the things that we are looking at in some countries of Africa, this is starting to happen, Many of the countries in food crisis today are in debt crisis. All of them, to be honest, in Africa. What it means, they are in debt stress, that they don't have instruments to access to new financing. So they are not only having to pay a huge service of their debt, but they also don't have access to additional funds. And these are food net importing countries. So how they are going to cover their food import bill? The only solution is to shrink it. And that means not only less food, but also less quality of food. Now, many of these countries have huge environmental values and assets, natural assets in their countries. But those are not part of their balance sheets. Those are not parts of their GDP. So we need to find innovative ways to value that also, because that will reduce the debt to GDP ratio, which is essential to help them to move out of debt stress situations. So I think a lot of work still can be done to be able to continue working and improving on these topics, which are so important today. Now, it is crucial to scale up both gender-focused financing and climate financing directed at agri-food systems. There is currently a significant gap in the amount and quality of development channel towards projects and instruments that seek to actively promote gender equality and women's empowerment in the agri-food system developing countries. There is a need to carry deeper reform of how the current development finance architecture views and interprets the promotion of gender equality and women's empowerment, both in the agri-food systems and the general economy, and channels its sources towards initiatives that carry such objectives. There is also a critical need to scale up flows of climate financing provided directed at agri-food systems, as I mentioned before. So again, here we are getting closer to the last mile, how we reduce the gender gap, how we increase inclusiveness, how we link to smallholders so that we can assure that these are linked to financial markets and we can move forward. Now, the current financial architecture for food security and nutrition is highly fragmented, creating further challenges to scale up financing to food security and nutrition. And that's something that we need to look carefully, because there is a preponderance of small and uncoordinated activities, lack of coordination among donors and development partners, misalignment with national and local priorities, weak governance and institutions in countries most in need, and lack of alignment of private focus with development objectives. We need to work very hard to create this coordination. The Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty has a financing pillar, which could be helping to do that. But we need to really support that process because we need to align international organizations, financial organizations, and also private sector to try to find ways in which we can gain complementarities and reduce the levels of inefficiencies and duplication that we are facing today. Just a little small drop on our side, and you all have in your desks 2 cards. One is the Hand in Hand initiative of FAO, and the second one, the Financing for Shock-Driven Food Crisis Facility. Why this is so important for us? The Financing for Shock-Driven Food Crisis Facility, which was launched by FAO in 2024 in the frame of the Italian G7 in collaboration with WFP and UN OCHA, and was supported by the G7 countries, aims to address the issues of growing gap between humanitarian funding directed at food crisis and the concrete early actions required to address them. Essentially, what we are trying to do is to find a solution to move from ex-post action, which the return is 1-to-1, to anticipatory action, where the return of every dollar is 7. That means that we can prevent, that means that we can increase resilience. But also, we are trying to attract private financing. Because if we are able to convert the reinsurance system into a probability-based trigger system, meaning the insurance pays not when the event happens, but when the probability of the event is as high as possible, so that there's certain assurance that the event will happen, that will give us enough time to do anticipatory action. And then we really get the returns. Not only that, $1 of insurance increases the coverage of 10. So I multiply times 10 my resources, plus I get the return of 1-to-7. So it's a very innovative way which builds upon what already was there in anticipatory action, but tries to bring an innovation based on the new data that we have and based on the new systems and modelings of triggers that we have today that allow us to scale up the little resources that we have today. Because the only thing that we can be sure is that the resources coming from G7 and G20 countries will be reduced. Therefore, we need to find ways to scale that up, and that's one way that we believe this could flow. And the Hand in Hand initiative is also looking at this last mile. It's trying to use territorial approaches to target areas where agriculture can move you out of hunger, and to try to link to financial systems, to try to link to investment financing, and de-risk companies and IFIs with information of quality so that they know that they will get a positive return if they invest in those areas, which we call them the green areas. But these are areas of high poverty, high hunger, but that they have substantial agricultural potential that they can move you out of hunger. So again, it's touching through the territories options. And we have more than 80 countries now. Many of you are participate, the countries present here, in this initiative, which was mentioned by the Ethiopian minister and others, which is accelerating investment, very targeted to find solutions. So colleague, let me stop there, and thank you so much. But again, I think we need to be very careful on how we accelerate this process. Coordination will be central, but also we need to understand that it's not just the issue of more access of financing for the agri-food system as a whole, but it's also the issue of the last mile, which is central, but will require significant transformation on the financial structure that will allow access to smallholder farmers through coordination to increase the scale, through insurance systems to reduce the risk, but also through innovative scoring systems so that we can adapt the financial system to a very complex agri-food system, but that supplies the right to food for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maximo, for providing such a comprehensive overview and giving everybody a sense of just how large the financing gap is, and also what are some of the potential solutions to closing that gap, which range from public financing at the domestic and international level to private financing and new financial instruments. We're now going to proceed with the first of our two sets of speakers on panels. I would like to invite up to the stage representatives from the governments of Zambia, Rwanda, the World Bank, Bayer, and Agra, please. Thank you. Thanks, Maximo. I apologize. Actually, the Minister of Zambia couldn't make it, so we have Rwanda here as well as the other colleagues. So please. So I think with the background that we've heard from the Deputy Secretary General and from Maximo's presentation, we have a great start, but now we'll get to hear more details regarding the initiatives that are happening on the ground, both at the country level, from our financing partners and from the private sector. So I'm going to start with Rwanda. We have Dr. Alexandra Ritanga, who's the Chief Technical Advisor and the National Food Systems Convener for the Rwandan Ministry of Agriculture and Animal Resources. Mr. Rutanga, can you tell us a little bit about Rwanda's perspective on how to make sure we have scaled and affordable finance for agri-food systems transformation in your country? Over to you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
I think you have to press this one.
Am I audible now? Thank you very much. Thank you, moderator. There are quite a number of promising innovative financing mechanisms. As far as Rwanda is concerned, we've been taking much advantage in concession loan financing. Catalytic funds, for example, try to make sure we de-risk investment in agriculture by attracting private sector investments. We've been also trying to give more importance and attention to guarantee schemes. We are part of the Africa Solidarity Fund, which is based in Mauritius. Rwanda is one of the shareholders. This is a very nice and strategic instrument that helps investors to get access to financing. So then another thing is the Challenge Fund that is mainly helping us to motivate innovative ideas, particularly from special groups like youth and women. So for example, I can name a few examples. The Agri-Tech Rwanda Innovation Challenge. It is supported by the Rwanda Green Fund and the CGR. That means it is data-based. And this offers grants of around 300 million per project for youth or women with the climate-smart agri-solutions. So Rwanda has also recently launched a climate-smart investment plan, which show clearly what should be the role of each and every actor, including private sector. The investment plan for climate agriculture investment, it has a budget of around 400 million USD, and the private sector plays a key role. And here we have a key engagement from the World Bank, IFC, so that there can be a kind of funding that can move from one investor to another one to make it sustainable. So under the strategic plan for agricultural transformation in Rwanda, we are also happy to share with you that 44% of that strategic plan, it has a value of around 6 billion USD, and most of it will come from the private sector. So these are a few examples that I can share with you as far as Rwanda is concerned.
Thank you so much for the variety of different examples that you outlined. I think that the other colleagues would be very interested in reacting to some of those instruments. Thank you so much. I'd like now to pass the floor to Ms. Alice Ruweza, who's the president of AGRA. Ms. Ruweza, you've heard from Rwanda on some of the innovative financial instruments that they're using in their priorities. Can you tell us more about how AGRA is supporting governments and their policy frameworks to increase investment in agri-food systems transformation?
Thank you very much for having me. AGRA started in 2006 as the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa. And it was formed way back by the late Kofi Annan, as you know, to tackle the issue of productivity. How can we increase productivity of smallholder farmers? And the big bet then was seed. You know, if we could get the seed to the farmer, we would make sure that the farmer is able to produce enough to feed themselves, but also take some to market. And, you know, we've since worked on seeds. We've realized that we needed to do more around agronomy and extension. We've also done more work now on markets and trade as well, and also on policy and state capability, but also adding to that climate, gender, and youth. And through that, what AGRA has done is been able to crowd in philanthropic funding and brought in public finance, and in a way being able to then give that in forms of grants, in forms of technical assistance, or in forms of other loans to governments to do that, to either develop their seed systems or to incubate some, build national systems, or also incubate some ideas that might work. We've also formed the Africa Enterprise Challenge Fund, for example, which now that one works directly with SMEs to help them solve some of the problems that they can't solve, access to finance and others. We've formed other funds like that. So there are many innovative finance we're finding out there. For example, I visited one of our projects here in Ethiopia just yesterday, and I was very encouraged to see farmers being able to get loans through just by using their yields as collateral, that warehouse receipt system, which I think is amazing. In fact, the exact words of the farmer was, we don't have to go to the bank to look for a loan, the loan comes to us. I even met a farmer who had said he bought a Chevy and said, who says a farmer cannot own a Chevy? But I think the big point here is that to be able to scale these kinds of ideas, you need to also have technical capacity, build capacity, and you need also to have the enabling framework. And now with aid drying up, we're also seeing the need that we're going to need to build local capital markets, and we're going to be able to build in other enabling framework, but also reduce some of the structural barriers. When we talk to a lot of the development finance institutions, they keep talking about the risk of investing in the sector because of climate, because of yields that have been a challenge for a long time. And I think we work very hard to de-risk. So some of the things we're doing, for example, Tanzania Development Bank, we've worked with them to be able to make sure you de-risk them and so that they can provide loans for that sector and solve the problem of access to finance. But climate finance is another point that came up, which I want to talk about, because earlier this year, we were the first recipient of the Green Climate Fund. The first time the Green Climate Fund gave funding for food and loss waste. 40% of Africa, we face post-harvest losses. So we're building this program and putting a facility there where we're working with financial institutions to encourage them to support farmers to be able to access loans for this and all of that. So there's a lot of ideas, many things out there. We're seeing things around, we're seeing some blended finance. We're seeing insurance as well, working very well. We're seeing weather index insurance, actually. We're seeing work around guarantee mechanisms and others. But I think the big point, again, is how do you, to take this to scale, you do need to build that technical capacity, and you do need to provide that enabling environment as well. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I think it was very well noted what you said about needing to build as well technical capacity, domestic capital markets, and to link things which are sometimes not linked, like food loss and waste, with climate financing. So thank you for those very interesting ideas and examples. I'd now like to turn to Ms. Shobha Shetty, who's the Global Director for Agriculture and Food Global Practice at the World Bank. Ms. Shetty, you've heard now from several governments as well as other actors about the need for scale and for greater investment in low and lower middle income countries. Can you tell us a little bit more about the World Bank's plans to make sure that there's adequate financing for these needs and how your part of the World Bank on agriculture and food practice is working on that?
Thanks very much, Lauren, and thanks very much for having me at this really important investment dialogue. I think as Maximo's presentation showed, we are really a very long way from ensuring adequate financing for agri-food systems transformation. And as Maximo said, this is as a result of several simultaneous crises, the polycrisis situation, which is also exacerbated by the high debt burdens and underinvestment in global public goods. So I think all of us understand and recognize the need for having new, scalable, innovative financing mechanisms to really achieve this transformation. So this is, the good news is that we have some successful examples, including debt for development swaps, sustainability-linked bonds, performance-linked loans, as well as results-based climate finance. And we're beginning to use all of them to ensure increased financing for our countries to support them on this journey. So last December, the World Bank supported a pioneering debt for development swap in Côte d'Ivoire, facilitated by the World Bank's new guarantee platform, freeing up almost $330 million in budget resources that could be then invested in the education sector. This is now being replicated in about 10 countries. Debt for food swaps can also fit into this framework where we have the macro-fiscal frameworks in place. And here, there is a strong permanency argument because the most affected by lack of food, as we've heard before, children and women, resulting in a permanent human capital loss. Another interesting example from the World Bank is the recent $350 million development policy loan to Uruguay with a built-in interest reduction mechanism, the bank's first ever performance-linked loan. In particular, the loan incentivizes ambitious reductions in the intensity of methane emissions from Uruguay's livestock sector. In recent years, we've also developed many outcome-linked bonds for several sustainability outcomes, including food loss and waste, which, as we know, would be the third largest emitter. So great to hear that Agra is now benefiting from a GCF funding for that. Plastic waste reduction, coral reef protection in Indonesia, rhino preservation in South Africa. And a recent innovation was the reforestation-linked bond that supports farming communities in Brazil to capture carbon and enhance biodiversity and improve food and nutrition security as well. And building on years of our experience through multilateral partnerships, we are now expanding the business of emission reduction crediting to new jurisdictions with forested agricultural production landscapes. And the objective of these financing schemes is to really maximize the climate outcomes derived from the effective conservation of ecosystems at the agricultural frontier. So this has not just delivered on climate, but also increased livelihoods for farmers and smallholders. And lastly, I think I would just like to say, while it's not innovative and public resources are scarce, we all know there's still a whole lot of money that's still trapped in wasteful supports or subsidies, almost 700 billion. So I think repurposing even 10% of these subsidies could really achieve significant economic, environmental, climate, and health outcomes. Almost $2.4 trillion is our estimate for this. So this is really calling about being much smarter about existing financial flows as well. So I will plead that, that we should also tap into that source of financing to really sort of take it to scale. Thank you.
Thank you so much for giving us the examples of the interesting new instruments that are being used in places like Cote d'Ivoire and how debt for food swaps might model that. And I really appreciate that you mentioned the long-term capital benefit, human capital benefit of investing in food systems transformation, as well as the mention of innovative instruments like the Rhino bonds, which I caught you saying as well. Thank you. I would now like to hear from the private sector. So Mr. Matthias Berenger, who's the Executive Vice President at Bayer. How can the private sector support the channeling of innovative financing to the sector? How can they help to bridge some of the gaps that we've been talking about and bring to bear their quite large resources for the sector?
Yeah, also thank you for having me, and I very much appreciate to share a couple of examples. I also want to say there are quite a few businesses investing in the agricultural space, increasingly so in smallholder farming. And the main reason why we are doing that is because it turns out to be a quite good investment. And that's one of the reasons why I'm optimistic that we are on an interesting path. So first of all, we at Bayer have decided that we really want to focus on reaching 100 million smallholder farmers by 2030. And this is not a philanthropic exercise, but really reaching means that these smallholder farms are able to do business with us in a revolving way, in other words, year after year. That enabled us to make a couple of bold choices when it comes to investments. One example, Zambia is not here today, is a 30 million euro investment in seed production in Zambia. That was a huge investment for us, but when we look at the demand for these kind of seeds that are pretty much standard in most other regions in the world, we realize even before completing the first investment, we need to think about the second, the third, the fourth investment on this continent alone to scratch on the surface of the demand that is out there. And of course, we are very excited in the kind of products we sell. For example, the seeds we produce, other innovations that come out of our R&D budget, which is 2.5 billion euros a year. But I have to say, when it comes to smallholders, the most exciting innovation I have seen was also captured on Massimo's slide and has been talked about a little bit, and that is insurance. When you are a farmer in the United States, in Europe, agriculture insurance is sort of a staple of your operation. When you are a smallholder farmer, you basically risk your livelihood every year, and that had only gotten harder. What comes to the aid of smallholder farmers is enormous innovation in fintech. Some of that, Shobha, has been driven and also kind of seeded by the IFC. Pula is one example we talked about in almost every conversation we have. And I can break it down as a practical example for Ethiopia, because by the end of this year, there will be 1 million smallholder farmers who have access to crop insurance. When we worked on that in detail, we added things like hailstorms into the insurance policy. And people were like, what about hailstorms? Those who live here know that now even hailstorms are a thing in Ethiopia. But the point is, smallholder farmers are able, without getting additional subsidies from the government of Ethiopia, by investing the value of a quarter of a chicken, they're able to protect agricultural value in the neighborhood of the value of a goat, of a grown-up goat. And these kind of insurances will make decisions of smallholder farmers to invest in inputs much, much easier. And I think they are also very linked to climate finance, because the reason why we have extreme weather events is not the emissions that smallholder farmers in poor countries have caused, but those are emissions caused by highly industrialized economies. So one of the things we need to do is, when we talk about adaptation, when we talk about climate finance, we need to funnel that money in fintech-driven, innovative insurance offerings that reach smallholder farmers directly. That happens at a scale of 1 million smallholder farmers here, of roughly 3 to 4 million smallholder farmers in Zambia. By the way, many of you know there was a huge drought last year in Zambia, and the insurance payouts hit a record on this continent, which of course is also good news. And these insurance models, if designed in the right way, and if blended finance is organized and orchestrated in the right way, again, are good business for the financial industry, so they will be scalable. Lastly, we need to have a culture that welcomes innovation. And since we started the process of the UN Food Systems Summit, we have seen more and more countries welcoming innovation coming from gene editing. Biotech here on this continent is now being welcomed by many countries. And I believe that that again is another ingredient for the kind of miracles that agriculture had produced before. Let's not forget that a country like Brazil in 1992, when the world came together for the Rio Summit, was a net food importer. So while I don't believe that every country needs to thrive for food autonomy, I think our job is to reduce the food import bill of most of the countries that also struggle with the debt crisis. And for me, what I've seen in China, what I've seen in Brazil, what I see in many countries in Southeastern Asia at the moment is also possible here in Africa, and that is that we innovate in order to increase the output whilst learning that we need to do that in a way that does not harm biodiversity or further accelerate the climate crisis. I've seen tons of examples that is possible, and I do believe we need to talk more about those solutions than about admiring the problem we all see in front of us.
Thank you so much. I think if you take away one thing from the session, one thing to remember is that investing in smallholder farmers is good business, as Matthias said, and I think that's an important point. And a good segue, I think, to our next panel. So, colleagues, thank you so much for joining us on this panel, and I'll invite now the representatives from the United Kingdom, from the African Development Bank, from Casa Deposito e Prestiti, and from TechnoServe to come and join us on the stage. Thank you all. It's probably it's a game to know where you're supposed to sit, right? You have to memorize the place settings from the floor. I'm gonna start with Ms. Jen Hagen, who's the Deputy Director of Global Food Security of the Global Food Security Hub at the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office of the United Kingdom. So, Jen, we know that this is a time in which public financing and there's a decreasing availability for aid. What can you tell us about FCDO's Global Food Security Hub and the role that you're playing in providing investment and incentives for agri-food systems transformation?
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting us to take part in the discussion today and for all the great interventions so far. Just to clarify, the department I run covers global food security, agriculture, land and social protection. And a team of us here today, including our special rep for nature, are really engaging on all these range of issues across that spectrum. So in a context of scarcer odor resources, the UK is really thinking hard about its new approach in the world going forward with all of the challenges that we face, and particularly that the agri-food system face. Two key parts of it, I think, for this discussion is one, that we want to be really responsive to partnerships and to our partner countries across the global south, including across Africa, really responding to your local, national, regional plans and solutions to make sure that the solutions are the right ones for the places where you are working to involve your food systems. And secondly, a shift towards being a much more strategic investor rather than a project owner. And thinking about what that means across the whole spectrum of finance that everyone else has referred to. Part of that is a real commitment to innovative finance mechanisms that can unlock finance, that can scale, and that can drive transformation where they're most needed, making the most of those scarcer resources. And the portfolio that I oversee, that we're quite excited about, that sort of works across FCDO and across the different offices and partnerships that we hold, is a multi-layered approach that's really, I guess, pushing us into what IFAD would call the first mile, and many others the last mile. So a portfolio of innovative mechanisms in lower income countries that primarily reach smallholder farmers, enabling them to invest in their own resilience, not just being bought from in the chain. And a portfolio that, alongside smallholder farmers, will invest in smaller agribusinesses, that well-documented missing middle of the private investment sector. We also aim, wherever possible, to invest in local and national food and nutrition security, slightly changing the focus of our work. And absolutely critical across all of that as the final layer, making sure that we're building in absolutely critical climate resilience and nature-positive approaches, so whether that's for soil health or water conservation, to make sure that the combination is a more sustainable set of solutions. But obviously that combination layers on to make it really at the acute end of the risk and return issues that constrain so much of the investment into agri-food systems through whether it's climate finance, whether it's domestic finance, other forms of finance. So 3 examples of things that we use, of many. One important point is that we actually use our bilateral climate finance to invest in this, and we use both grant and capital finance to do this. One is that we're really pleased to be one of the founding donors into FASA, which is a first loss facility, a fund of funds that works in Africa to support smaller agribusinesses, supporting through a network of local and regional investors across the continent. And we use our investment in that to push into the smaller ticket and to push into the more sustainable. The second approach that we work hard on with IFC, for example, through the GAFSP program and the private sector window of that, is helping them to think about local currency use in this sector in many places where Forex is really prohibitive, and certainly many areas of countries where Forex is really prohibitive. And then finally, although it's a broader approach, we would also stress the use of TA alongside catalytic investments and the important blend that can create to really drive, whether that's TA into businesses, whether it's TA to create incentives for domestic lenders to come more into agri-food, or whether it's TA to shape the developmental and sustainability impact of DFIs. And it's a real pleasure to be on the panel with Anna, who will talk more about that, funded through our CASA program. And I think as we sort of step back and look at this portfolio as it moves, as just a number of things between us all that we're all sort of trying to get behind to solve some of these problems that we all share, there are a number of big questions still come up that we're all looking for coalitions and partnerships, so please do come and talk to us if you'd like to talk about them further. One is how do you build that pipeline so that you don't end up with just doing the first loss and then you can't get any further for those businesses that are really viable investment propositions. A second piece is around complex settings, that we need this investment to be able to get into the more complex where the risks and the shocks are higher. And we still see a clustering around this, some similar countries, even within the lower income bracket. The third one, is scaling beyond islands of excellence. We all know that we can create islands of excellence with this, and we went to see an amazing project here in Ethiopia on Saturday that has real potential to scale, but there is always a potential that they get left as islands of excellence, and how do we join those up to create the systemic change that Amina was talking about? And then lastly, going back, I guess, to where I started, if concessional and grant finance is getting scarcer across the world, how do we do that risk sharing and risk reducing, which is so core to many of the instruments, whether they're blended finance or others that we're working on? What other sources of finance that should we be working together on in that coalition that Maximo was talking about? And so for us, a big question, if there are any philanthropic organizations in the room who are interested in that space, let's start a slightly more diverse conversation. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I love the call to talk to partners at the end of the session, but also the emphasis there on the fact that the concessional financing has to meet the needs of the highest risk parts of the system, and then we need partnership to make sure that we can reach the rest. So thank you. And also like to rephrase islands of excellence, but important that we want islands of excellence, but then we want to scale and learn from them. Thank you so much. I think that that's a nice complement, some of the things you were mentioning about Forex, to turn to Mr. Jacob Odur, who's the lead economist for the West African region at the African Development Bank. Jacob, can you tell us a little bit about what the AFDB is doing, maybe particularly in West Africa, to scale investments in agri-food systems?
Yeah, thanks. And good afternoon, colleagues. Now, a number of areas that the African Development Bank and, of course, all MDBs, a number of MDBs are working on to scale financing, specifically targeted for agriculture, maybe not just in West Africa, but generally in the continent. One of the things that we are doing is to use concessional financing to scale up financing specifically targeted for small-scale smallholder farmers. A number of examples. One of the examples we have is a loan that we gave to Tanzania Agriculture Development Bank, and this was meant for on lending to smallholder farmers. Part of this financing also came with technical assistance through from our affirmative action for women, targeting youth and women enterprises. So the second instrument that we use for scaling financing or unlocking the binding constraints is technical assistance aimed at developing bankable projects, specifically for smallholder farmers. And secondly, across the continent now, we are also unlocking infrastructure gaps in agriculture through the development of special agro-industrial processing zones. As you know, bankability and market access is limited for several farmers and farmer organizations because of limited access to electricity, transport, and so on. We have done that in several countries. The last approval was done for Togo just in June, about 38 million USD. Ethiopia has benefited from it in the past. Nigeria, we have approval of phase 1 of the program of about 210 million ongoing. Second phase is planned for board in September. And then second, we also have risk mitigation instruments. So first of all, scaling of financing through concessional financing, and then secondly, risk mitigation instruments, and we have several, one of which is partial credit guarantees, which we use quite often at the sovereign level with private sector, but also at the smallholder level. So when we do partial credit guarantees at the sovereign or at corporate levels, we guarantee risks at the corporate or at the higher level. But we've also worked with the private agricultural sector support trust fund, to finance crop insurance, particularly for smallholder farmers. As you know, reaching the smallholder farmers is sometimes difficult through the big credit guarantees. Yeah, so we have also financed innovations just at the small innovators level. We have different trust funds, one of which is the Youth Entrepreneurship and Innovation Multi-Donor Trust Fund, which has small pockets of financing that goes up to about $1 million USD, and this can be accessed by generally individuals organized through associations, and can be used for supporting incubation of ideas that sometimes look really, I would say, stupid, but at the end are impactful, coming from some people that maybe are not organized. And then the other thing that we also do is a lot of thought leadership on some of the instruments and tools that are emerging, including recently on the launch of the hybrid capital that we launched in 2024, and also the discussion around the rechanneling of SDRs, which is going to be able to expand the scale of financing through MDBs. Again, such events like what we are having today are important. Through sharing of best practices, we do this a lot, just to share ideas and learn what is emerging. One of the events that we had was similar to this, was during our annual meetings in 2024. And then lastly, we try to be as much as possible to be active participants. I think, and this goes also to the role of the private sector, we need to be always available, particularly in discussions and engagements that require the scaling up of innovative financing. And one of the instruments that we also try to encourage and be present in issues to do with voluntary carbon credits and syndications. We have done a bit of syndications together with the private sector, pulling private sector to ride on our AAA rating for the assurance of their credit profiles. Yeah, so thank you. Let me stop here.
Thank you so much, Jacob. Now, instead of hearing from a multilateral development financing institution, we're going to hear from a national development financing institution. We have here with us Mr. Giulio Del Magro, who's head of funding within the International Development Cooperation Unit of Italy's Development Bank, Cassa Depositi e Prestiti. Giulio, can you tell us a little bit about how development finance institutions can support innovative financing at scale for this sector?
Thank you. Yes, I think that probably it's important to understand who is the debtor, who are we financing, in order to define what kind of products or what kind of innovative products we can apply. Of course, when we're talking about smallholder farmers and small enterprises, we consider indirect financing. So we consider financing local banks, local financial actors, in order for them to on-lend to the farmers and to the micro enterprises. And then, of course, when you talk about innovative financing, you have to consider blending resources. So it was mentioned how important it is to find donors that will support you in providing cheap funding, of course, because local banks ask for cheap funding, and you have to be careful that then is a transfer of benefits, because you want this cheap funding to go then to better condition for the final beneficiaries, and then they want to have de-risking tools, and de-risking tools means guarantees on their lending, which can then at a later stage lead to guarantees for securitized products, which comes at a later stage. For the time being, we only active on guaranteeing and de-risking portfolio of loans to farmers, to micro SMEs, to local banks. But then you need the resources. We are very thankful to the European Commission. We have support by them on a Terra program in partnership with FAO, which is providing technical assistance to local banks. Because it was mentioned before, technical assistance is of paramount importance. You need those local banks to be supported in defining, their credit analysis, how to monitor the programs, how to check that their products are in line with the desire of the beneficiaries, the final beneficiaries. Then when you go to middle-sized companies, then it's a different story. You can go for more tailor-made products, and then you can start thinking about collateral financing. I remember with the African Development Bank, we did a program, a product in Ghana, where it was collateralized as a pledge on foreign accounts, where actually the company was receiving money for foreign buyers that allowed to provide for very competitive financial condition. Or you can think about inventory financing. It was mentioned before, the warehouse receipt. That's a very interesting development that we are now considering. And then capital market tools. With medium-sized companies, you can start thinking about mini bonds. Is something we are discussing again with the support of the European Commission in Morocco, with a program to define innovative mini bond program, or in the Balkan again we are considering this kind of product, which is interesting because on one side allow this mid-sized company to obtain different sources of funding, and on the other you also supporting development of local capital markets. And then when you go to large companies, then it's again very different story. There is normally a lot of competition to finance large companies, very large companies. In this case, I think, what we are considering, and it was mentioned before, is sustainability-linked bonds, result-based bonds, where you provide some form of incentives to those companies. If they do their activity well, you can give them some discounts. Then the debate here is if you want to spend concessional resources to support the price to very large companies. That's a discussion you have to consider. But anyway, this is a way that we are considering for some important players in the food markets. And then finally, last but not least, sovereign financing. And of course, here before World Bank, Shabia was mentioning a lot of different kind of products, policy-based, of course, the disbursement linked to actual implementation of reforms. So it's very important to create an enabling environment. We have here a partnership with IFAD. We're working with them with resources, blending resources coming from the government of Italy, the Italian Climate Fund, because of course, again, you need to provide some very concessional terms when you're talking about sovereign financing in the agri sectors. Maybe debt swap is another area where we are looking at with interest. There are some programs in Africa that we are considering to entering in. Thank you.
Thank you, Giulio, for those excellent examples and also for telling us about the partnership with IFAD there at the end. Finally, we have our last speaker, last but certainly not least, Ms. Ana Herrera, who's the Director of Inclusive Investment at Technoserve. Anna, tell us about some of the innovative ways that Technoserve is working to support investment in agri-food systems.
Thank you for having us. So TechnoServe is implementing an FCDO-supported program called CASA. And CASA stands for Commercial Agriculture for Smallholders and Agribusiness. In CASA, we've supported about 80 businesses across 22 countries and mobilized about 15 investors. The objective of the facility, of the technical assistance facility, is to drive investments in the agriculture space. A lot of the speakers earlier today have talked about the agriculture finance gap, right? Through our work with CASA, we actually see that in certain markets like Tanzania, Mozambique, Nigeria, investment flows to the farm remain at between 13 to 18% of the total investments in the country. And through CASA, what we're trying to do is encouraging inclusive agribusiness models and also influencing development financial institutions to actually increase and enhance investments in the space. What we've learned is that, well, evidence in our work suggests that building up agribusinesses into this inclusive trajectory increases the return on investments for farmers. And technical assistance can actually drive these shared value models. Right? What are some examples of this? In India, we actually worked with one of the largest agri-tech companies called DeHaat in developing an agri-input finance product that was scaled to thousands of farmers and eventually took up by a specialist agri lender. In Kenya, we're supporting an agribusiness in the aquaculture sector. And the problem of the company is their ability to scale successfully is hinged on a stable fish supply and the feed sales through credit. So what we're doing is actually creating a risk share mechanism that unlocks investments from a commercial bank such as Equity Bank, right? What we're seeing is that there is a lot of opportunities for DFIs to invest in inclusive and shared value models that actually flows to the farm. There's a wide range of models that development financial institutions can invest in. And with technical assistance, they can invest in models like structured off-taker relationships, for example, commercial extension provision, financing inputs and services that boost productivity, right? More development finance collaboration is needed, and more specialist agriculture investors should participate in this space. And then for the private sector, we see that a reframing of how to run their businesses and actually an openness to test shared value models can really drive change and generate commercial value along with creating impact for smallholders.
Thank you so much, Anna. And I think that you've all heard a huge number of very innovative ideas, projects, ideas for scaling new types of innovative instruments. Maybe if I can just summarize into sort of 3 things that we heard today. The first, I would say that there was a strong emphasis on the need to de-risk, whether that was about de-risking on the ground through instruments like insurance or working in partnership to blend finance so that we can de-risk, and also address structural issues around macroeconomic management and high debt levels, which can really constrain countries from being able to invest in this sector. The second is we know that the financing that's available is not enough. We can repurpose money. Both the FAO and the World Bank mentioned that. But we also need technical support to make sure that that money really reaches down to the ground, especially the most vulnerable. Women and youth were mentioned, but also very rural communities and people that are hard to reach. And finally, I think most of the panelists talked about the fact that they're not doing this alone, that there's a need to work in partnership, that each part or each actor in the system has a role to play, whether that's concessional resource provision, technical and policy support, implementation support, investment directly into smallholder farmers, or sort of innovating on creative, large, and scalable financial instruments. So I think it was very valuable. Thank you all so much for your contributions. Thank you, those of you in the audience, for your time and attention. And I'm happy to close the session. Thank you.